Hello and welcome to Revision Tips for SIPS Level 6 Professional Diploma in Procurement and Supply. This is Module 2, which is Global Commercial Strategy, and it's Learning Outcome 3, which is to understand strategy formulation and implementation. So Chapter 3 of the book looks at an in-depth understanding of how business strategic decisions are made in organisations and the impact these decisions have on the overall supply chain. Now, traditionally thinking on strategy, it tends to define it in terms of planning to arrive at an optimum strategy for a given context. But the process itself is made up of two stages. You've got the strategy formulation and then the implementation itself. So these strategic decisions will end up as tactical decisions and then operational decisions. But firstly, we're going to look at how we can evaluate corporate and business strategic decisions that affect supply chains, and specifically around market penetration, consolidation, product development, and market development on this slide. So there are strategic decisions that organisations make on how to enter a market and grow their market share, and then how to achieve sustainable competitive advantage. And they're termed grand strategies, which is a sort of decision that provides direction for an organisation's strategic actions. Now, on the left-hand side of this screen, you're seeing the Ansoff matrix, which is a framework used to identify its growth opportunities and make business decisions to achieve growth. So the Ansoff matrix is a business analysis technique that provides that framework for looking for opportunities for growth, which will help a business to increase its market share. The end result might be growing the business through existing products, existing markets, or new products and new markets. So on the left-hand side, you've got new and existing, and at the bottom, you've got the products being existing or new. And the essential outcomes for this is if you're looking at existing markets with existing products, you're just trying to penetrate the market. So maximize where you're expanding your growth strategy. So you're trying to increase your market share by pushing your existing products just a little bit further in the market. Or you can look to push your existing products into new markets. This is known as market development. So what you're doing here is you're looking at potentially developing your products into a new market within the world somewhere. It could be the same geographical region or an unsaturated geographical region. So you could be looking at new segments, new users, new geographical markets, or even new distribution channels. But if we look at the new products, then we can do new products with our existing customers, which is a situation we call product development. So with product development, you're looking at new products to sell to your existing customers. You can modify, improve, or develop new things altogether, or make them complementary to your existing product range to attract a wider range of customers. But you could also do innovation under this umbrella. So in the stages in the sort of conventional product development stage, we've got the sort of ideas generation and producing the new strategy and then testing it before we bring it to market. But we'll go through that in a second. And then diversification is actually new products completely in completely new markets. So probably the most risky strategy that any organisation will make, because you're either entering into an industry or market which you don't currently operate in, or bringing a new product into the market with new customers. So it can be quite risky, especially if you've got no experience in those markets. But the drivers for diversification could be to seek efficiency gains and economies of scale or economies of scope, stretching parenting capabilities of the organisation, increasing your market power in a response to a decline in your market, or to distribute your risk. Now, if you look at the right-hand side, we're just looking at market penetration constraints just for a second. So these are the existing markets with the existing products. Now, why might people do market penetration? It could be because they want to retaliate against competition, or because they've got some legal constraints. So from a retaliation perspective, it could be that there's increased rivalry from a competitor and you want to try and defend your market share. Or another constraint on market penetration is the legal or regulatory frameworks. There are often sort of competitions and markets authorities that investigate things like mergers and acquisitions, because anything that leads to at least 25% of the national market share could potentially be blocked by the Competitions Commission. So you may not be able to do it in that way. At the bottom, the consolidation, this is a strategy where an organisation focuses on its existing market and uses its existing products to defend its position. So in terms of like defending the market share, they'll try and get a greater market share. And this is quite a defensive strategy. But it's all about sort of making sure the organisation has long-term sustainability. You could downsize or divest. So if the size of the overall market is declining, you may opt to reduce the size of your operations by downsizing or selling off some of your activities. And the last one, in terms of combining capacities, sometimes consolidation can be used to describe a strategy that looks at buying out your rivals, and especially in an industry facing decline. So you're acquiring the weaker competitors and closing any unproductivity capabilities out there in the market. So product development, product development is the process by which you modify existing products or create new products. As I said earlier, this is about innovation. And the stages, you're obviously going to have to identify this new idea. You know, that's going to be the thing that kind of brainstorms, and you look carefully at making sure that you generate an idea that's got, got some potential of working. Your new product strategy will help you to define what the product is. You know, it's not just about developing an idea, but being able to clearly define the objectives and goals before you go any further with that idea. Then you need to look at your specification and requirements and design so that you can bring a prototype to market, making sure that you've looked at engineering, design, marketing, planning, and have a clear idea about what the product is going to want to do, or who you're aiming your product at. Then there needs to be some testing and implementation. It's an important stage to verify that the prototype actually meets the requirements of the spec. And then you can go on to commercialization, where you're bringing the product to market, you're producing it, and you're launching it. Now, on the right-hand side, we've got market development. Now, market development is a growth strategy with existing products being offered into new markets. You could be expanding into unexploited or unsaturated regions, or sometimes products are given a cosmetic modification to appeal to new markets. So as I said earlier, you could be developing into new segments. You could be looking for new users and acquiring new users who haven't actually been targeted in your initial strategy. The new geographical markets, if you're looking to go national, regional, or even international, or new distribution channels to create a more convenient shopping experience for your customers. But there are some hindrances to this. You know, you face issues when it comes to things like new regions not being successful or failing to understand the needs of your new target segment. So in terms of the risk levels at the bottom, existing products in existing market is a relatively low risk. Existing products into new market is a moderate risk. You know the product works, but will they work in those new markets? New products come with the highest risks. I mean, new products into existing markets is a high risk, and new products into new markets, this diversification strategy comes with a kind of medium risk as well. So in terms of diversification, there are two types of diversification. You can have one that's related and one that's unrelated. So diversification is a strategy where you enter into a new industry in which you don't operate or create a new product for a new market. Related diversification is developed beyond an organization's current products and markets, but within its capabilities and resources. So this form of diversification, you can go into a business that you're familiar with, and it's along its existing production capabilities and market channels. So a good example of this would be to engage in diversifying your products. So Unilever is a case study in the book that looks at developing a new detergent in existing to its existing lines of detergents, but there's just a few modifications. So it is a related diversification. It can be vertical or horizontal, backward or forward. I'll show you this visually in a second, but vertical integration is achieved when an organization's strategy is to acquire companies that supply inputs, such as the raw materials, or outputs, such as the distribution. Whereas vertical integration can take the form of either backward or forward. Backward integration involves developing strategies relating to the inputs in your value chain. So you could acquire a supplier that makes your products. And a forward integration is a diversification strategy that integrates activities relating to outputs, so taking charge of your marketing and distribution channels. For example, a car manufacturer may acquire its distributor and repair firm. And then horizontal integration is one where you develop activities that are complementary to your parent activities. So, acquiring smaller firms that do the same or similar things. The unrelated diversification at the bottom involves products and services beyond your current resources and capabilities. It's also termed as conglomerate strategy because it's the process of adding products and services that are not relevant to your business plan. So this conglomerate diversification is sought when the organisation plans to acquire businesses because the business represents the most promising investment opportunity. But there's no real business fit. Instead, the most important consideration is the profit. So here's just a visualization of how it works. At the top of this, the top of the dotted line, this is your backward integration where you're trying to acquire something that supplies you, so your raw materials, components, and those sorts of organizations. The one in the middle, the horizontal integration, is the complementary products or services, and the forward integration is trying to acquire your distribution channels, marketing, sales, servicing, and repairs. So I guess you've got the upstream behind you and the downstream in front of you. We're now going to look at some of the portfolio matrices from the growth share, directional policy, and parenting matrix. So the very first one on the left is the Boston matrix, the BCG, Boston Consulting Group matrix. This is a portfolio technique to help managers balance the flow of cash resources among the businesses within the organization's portfolio. So it helps to identify basic strategy purpose for each business within its portfolio. So on the left-hand side, you've got market growth, and at the top going across, you've got the market share. So the ones that are I guess the most sturdy are your cash cows. Your cash cows have high market share and low market growth, but they're very sturdy. They've been around for a long time. They're mature products that customers will be repeating purchases without any quibbles. The dogs are the ones that have low market growth and low share. So these are quite weak in the market and they're difficult to make a profit from. So it's likely that you'll be replacing dogs with different types of products. Your stars are the things that have got high growth and high share. So, they're doing really, really well. They're sort of new innovation and customers are loving them. So it's quite possible that a star could become a cash cow in the future. But the question marks are the ones where they've got some growth but low market share. So we don't know what to do with these yet. So you might decide whether to increase investment or just keep an eye on them, basically, because a question mark could either become a star or a dog quite easily. Now, the directional policy one in the middle, this came from McKinsey, which is again another matrix to help managers balance their business units within their portfolio. So it looks at how attractive the relevant market is in which they're operating and the competitive strength of your business unit. So what you can see with the attractiveness on one side and the strength on the other, from low to medium to high, it will help you to concern yourself with where you have relatively low market share and the largest and most attractive markets. So if you think about the strength in the market that's low with long-term attractiveness, the most desirable position is to have large market shares in markets with long-term attractiveness and strong SBU strength. So it's almost telling you what to do, isn't it? Because if you find yourself in a position at the bottom left, it's asking you to kind of harvest or withdraw from those sorts of markets. In the middle range, you manage these selectively for your earnings, but definitely invest for growth where you've got the potential for high and high in terms of that competitive position and market attractiveness. And then the third matrix on the very right-hand side is called the parenting matrix. Upender Kaktru explains that corporate parenting is about the extent to which business unit strategies are enhanced and managed at corporate level. So it's a strategy employed by highly centralized and diversified organizations with large resource pools. It looks at the roles and responsibilities of a multi-business parent and its business units. So in certain industries, certain times you could be in this kind of alien territory where, you're not really sure about the fit between your business unit's critical success and the fit between the opportunities from the parent organization's resources and skills. The heartland businesses is obviously a little bit more attractive in terms of the high highs. You've got the value trap and the ballast businesses, but let's go through them. So the heartland business units are business units which the parent company has a high feel for and to which it can bring high benefits. So the parent understands them very well and can continue to add value. These businesses will probably be at the core of their future organization strategy. The ballast business units, the parent understands these units well, but cannot be of much benefit to them. So they allow them to have some independence in their operations so they can access external skills and resources where needed. But they do encourage them to seek guidance from the parent company. Value trap businesses are where the business units benefit through its resources and capabilities, but it doesn't understand the operations of these units. These units are quite dangerous because they're seen viable because the parent adds value to them, but can be deceptive because the parent doesn't have the right to feel for them, hence they're likely to be harmful to invest in. So you might need to acquire some new capabilities to be able to move the value trap business into a heartland. And the alien business units, there's a very clear misfit between the parent because the parent company can offer little value to them and doesn't really understand them either. So the best strategy with regard to your alien business is to divest them. Now, as mentioned earlier, companies within sometimes feel the need to diversify their risk and look for opportunities to expand and grow. And in addition to adding new products to their range, they can grow through market development into these new geographical regions, which is sometimes known as internationalization. And that's involving operating in different geographical markets. Now, organisations that have developed into new geographical regions are said to have pursued an international strategy. And that's divided into 5 main themes. You've got the internationalisation drivers, and these are the forces that lead an organisation to seek these international strategies. The geographical and organisational specific advantages, which can be realised through competing internationally. The international strategy are the drivers, and the geographical and organic and organisation specific advantages, they need to be sufficiently strong to indicate an international strategy. And there are various strategic approaches that may be considered to move an organisation into international markets. And the market selection happens after an organisation has decided on a broad approach to its international strategy. The next consideration is the selection of the markets it should prioritise. And then the entry mode is after the target countries have been selected. You need to consider how the organisation should enter each market. There are a number of factors that drive an organisation to pursue international strategies. And according to George Yip's globalisation framework, The international potential is driven by factors that are classified into 4 sections. So you've got the market drivers at the top. Market drivers could be things like homogeneous customer needs, where the customer's needs are similar or the same, the global customers, and transferable marketing. The cost drivers on the left look for scale economies, country-specific differences, or favourable logistics. The government drivers on the right look for trade policies and technical standards and host government policies. And at the bottom, the competitive drivers looks for independence or interdependence between countries and the competitors' global strategies. Now, if we look at the global, regional and local dimensions of your strategic choice, when you decide on this international strategy, you must take a number of decisions, such as how to enter a market and the strategies that will make best use of those new markets. The decisions are going to be influenced by factors that include the nature of your business advantage, the organisation home country and the international markets it has, and the needs of its customers. But there are different strategies under the heading of international strategies. There are 2 opportunities an organisation can take advantage of to gain national and international source of advantage. These are the national advantage and the international value network. So the national advantage is sometimes known as Porter's diamond model. It's a framework used to illustrate the reasons why some nations are more competitive than others, but it also illustrates why some industries are more successful in some countries than in others. So this diamond can really help you to understand why some countries are associated with specific industries and others are not. So for example, there's a number of countries that are associated with trade skills and specific expertise, like Germany, associated with luxury cars, or Switzerland with banking expertise, or Japan with high quality electrical or electronic products. So there are 4 determinants for home and national advantage: the factor conditions, the home demand conditions, related and supporting industries, and your organisational strategy, industry structure and rivalry. So in terms of factor conditions, these are things like raw materials, land and labour. And these advantages, there are advantages of these being available at national level, which can lead to a general advantage for an organisation in international market because it's cheaper for them to offer a benefit to the country that they're manufacturing in. The home demand conditions. Now, if your domestic customer in the country where you're located create a high demand for the product, and especially if the local customer's demographic demand is high level of quality, you can gain experience in making this product at such an extent that it's able to meet the demands of your overseas customers. So for example, the Japanese markets demand high quality electronic equipment, and that raises the bar for manufacturers who are as a result renowned for worldwide making high quality electrical and electronic equipment. So people over the world will trust Japanese equipment because of this factor. The related and supporting industries is when the related organisations in an industry are geographically clustered together. That can generate a national advantage to those organisations which can easily consult with the other and potentially share expertise. So take Silicon Valley in San Francisco. That forms a cluster of technology research and innovation experts, giving the region and America as a whole an advantage in the technology industry. And then organisational strategy, industry structure and rivalry. The industry structure and competitive rivalry of an industry can act as an advantage for a firm in a certain country. So if we go back to Japan and their car manufacturers, they do compete against each other. So this acts as an advantage because they're always working harder and more efficiently to be successful, constantly aiming to reach wider markets than their rivals. Now on the right-hand side, you've got the international value network. Not every advantage an organisation has will be domestic. Sometimes you need to take advantage of your value networks, and that's drawn from international relations. So cost advantages, there are obvious advantages to certain international affiliations and operations with different countries. They relate to economic gains that can be made in the costs that can be cut by operating in a host nation rather than a home nation, because labour costs and material costs and tax policies are lower, or there's incentives. Unique capabilities, you may choose to locate your manufacturing based in areas where it's got ability to access unique capabilities. So for example, Boeing, the aircraft manufacturer, has located its largest engineering centre just outside Moscow. And that's to access Russia's unique capabilities in aerodynamics. And then the national characteristics, you could be looking for influence to develop differentiated products that are aimed at different markets. So you could make supplementary materials from countries, but find labels that final product says made in Germany, because the association that customers will have that products made in Germany are of a very high quality. And then your international strategies, which gets slightly more complicated. So having considered some of the advantages that organisations possess, they can influence its international strategy and look at different ways to apply that internationally. There are four main international strategies you can apply. Simple export, which is low coordination of activities, but concentrated configuration of activities. So here, what you're doing is something like manufacturing, concentrating in one country, especially the country of the organisation's origin. And a simple export strategy is the most suitable. So there's no coordination or very little coordination of the marketing of the exported products. And then we've got complex export. High coordination of activities and concentrated configuration of activities is needed here. So this is typically an organisation which has concentrated main activities in its home country, and it's built up a coordinated marketing strategy in external host countries. So you can reap economies of scale by manufacturing locally and then exporting to external markets. The activities like pricing, branding, and marketing are coordinated outside the home country. So it does require a degree of coordination, more than the simple export strategy. Your multi-domestic strategy needs low coordination activities and dispersed configuration. So the international activity is low in each region and tends to operate almost independently instead of exporting. Each market is treated separately and independently, but the needs of the local domestic market are given a priority. So in every region, there'll be portfolios and local adaptations that are made, so the corporate portfolio is very diversified. And then the final one is the global strategy. So in the global strategy, it's typified by high coordination of activities and activities which are dispersed across the world. So you choose, depending on the specific location advantages they offer for each of the organisation's activities, like manufacturing, product development, and marketing. Each of these activities may be located in different parts of the world. So we're now going to move on to methods of pursuing strategies. This can be organically, through mergers and acquisitions, or strategic alliances, but regardless of your strategic decision, each organisation will have to consider the best method to adopt to pursue a chosen strategy. So organic development is the most straightforward and most commonly used method. It's a strategy that's developed organically by one which is developed by building on and developing on your own capabilities. So it's a primary strategic method for achieving organisation growth. So the previous year's earnings are reinvested in the organisation to develop its internal capacities. Increasing capacities can take the form of building up the organisation's assets, enlarging its premises, increasing its human capital, hiring new staff, or looking at new technology. And then a merger is the process of creating one large organisation from two former individual organisations who merge or join together to share resources. They're typically conducted by shareholder consent and the consent of the shareholder with the largest shareholding. But the shareholders from both sides of the mergers become shareholders in the new larger organisation, which considers mergers and acquisitions in different industries. It's possible because it's important that a procurement professional is prepared for that possibility when organisations merge with or acquire or are being acquired by another organisation. So you need to be aware of the trends in the wider industry. So if there are rumours about competitors seeking to merge, or maybe a simple maintaining good communication channels with your senior managers to ensure immediate knowledge of any potential deals. An acquisition is otherwise known as a takeover. The term is typically used when the approach of the larger company is not welcomed by a smaller company. A hostile takeover is the form of acquisition in which the smaller company is purchased outright by the larger company, despite the opposition of the smaller company management. This requires a huge cash injection, but the power of the buying organisation is absolute, and in such a case, there are zero requirements for mutual agreement. In general, both mergers and acquisition are described as integration, which is an external growth mechanism. And then the next one is strategic alliances. This occurs when two or more organisations agree to share resources and activities to pursue a common strategy. So it's a collaborative agreement between two or more organisations, will be highly formalised and fairly, they can sometimes be fairly informal agreements, but the duration of the alliance will suit the market conditions and strategies. Some will lead to the formation of long-lasting companies, while others will last for just a short period of time to suit a particular need. So going back to the mergers and acquisitions, in terms of what influences them, I suppose, why do they happen? There are a number of reasons, actually. It starts with like the change in business environments. I mean, change is inevitable, I suppose. It's rapid, and sometimes organisations need to adapt. It could be speed of entry. Sometimes a market changes so fast, you've got no other option but to rule out organic development. The nature of competition, certain industries are highly competitive, others face very high barriers to entry. The opportunities for consolidation to form stronger business units. In terms of the financial markets, which ones have high value shares and the opportunities to acquire the low shares. The opportunities to exploit strategic capabilities. So that could be buying something outright or through a merger and acquisition. So for example, a company may buy another business overseas to benefit from their research and development skills. It could be about cost efficiency, benefiting from economies of scale and seeking to achieve more synergies where two or more organisations are integrated. It could be about shareholder expectations. Shareholders might take into account that they want to achieve organic growth or achieve some sort of growth through acquisition in the fastest way possible. Managerial ambition. It could be to do with a manager's personal goals to make a legacy. Pressure to boost share value, and that's important for shareholders when they use investment for speculation in the markets. So if they can boost the share value, this short-term gain may be prejudicial to the organisation's interest in the long term. You've got access to distribution channels. Sometimes organisations pursue these mergers and acquisitions to gain resources and input on better terms. To gain brand names or intellectual property, such as patents that are owned by the brands. Or finally, to asset strip. So you could acquire a company specifically to harvest its assets, break it up and sell it into parts separately, gaining more than it's paid for outright as an acquisition. And then moving on to the strategic alliances, in terms of what motivates them, you've got the ability to obtain resources and capabilities so that each organisation can obtain something that they don't have. For example, banks make strategic alliance with payment system companies like Visa and MasterCards, since they don't have these capabilities internally. You've then got critical mass. That's the size an organisation needs to reach in order to effectively compete the market. So these form of alliances will lead to reduced costs and improved customer offerings. So an example, in 2018, the supermarket giant Carrefour in France and Tesco in the UK announced plans to create a long-term strategic alliance to increase the purchasing power of their suppliers. It was intended to create strategic relationships for each company with global suppliers, but they have joint purchasing power. But as a result, organisations benefit from lower costs due to economies of scale and will be able to pass on the lower cost to their customer. Co-specialisation is a form of strategic alliance which involves limited collaboration or is collaboration for a specific goal. So each partner will concentrate on its own activities and operations, collaborating really only in name. And then learning and manufacturing opportunities. This can happen in industries with very specific technologies, which often are formed so that each organisation can benefit from the others. Competitive pressure, where two organisations in the same industry see their market share threatened by another competitor, and therefore potential dominance. So they may be driven by this to collaborate to protect their own positions and more effectively compete against the company with the largest market share. Or capital pooling, where they have high capital requirements. They might come together to pool their funds in order to be able to afford specific projects. The types of strategic alliances are joint ventures, consortia, and networks. Joint ventures are formalised alliances by two partner organisations who remain independent of each other, but they form a collaborative venture that's intended to achieve a certain goal, so to provide labour or to enter a new market or to generate revenue. Consortia would be about a number of organisations focusing on a particular project. So, for example, a project to construct a sewer will typically involve a consortium of different organisations like a surveyor, project managers, excavation firms and construction companies, as well as the sort of relevant water authorities. So the consortium of companies involved in this specific duration of the project, when the project is completed, the consortium is dissolved. And then networks are a far more flexible type of partnering than consortia and joint ventures. I mean, some of these networks are formalised and contractual, while others are just very informal, but it helps you to gain a mutual advantage of working together on the basis of trust. So you create a hub to support each other. So we're now going to look at the strategy evaluations, suitability, acceptability, and feasibility. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see the product life cycle. Now, the whole purpose of strategic analysis is to give managers the information they need to make strategic decisions. So product and market decisions are decisions in relation to which products and which markets are important to give competitive advantage and sustainability to an organisation. And decisions include whether to use existing or new products and whether to continue operating in existing markets or venture into new. So on the right-hand side, you can see these generic strategy decisions, which are taken to achieve a competitive position. So Porter's generic strategies include ROCE, which is return on capital employed, DCF, discounted cash flow, The Towers matrix, which was derived from SWOT, to evaluate strategic options against the strengths, weaknesses of the organisations plotted against any opportunities and threats. EVA, economic value added, and TSR, total shareholder return. So moving on to managing intended and realised strategies. So I guess here is the field of strategic management where there's continuous debate about the source of the strategy or what constitutes the most appropriate approach. Now, some perceive strategic management as a planned or prescriptive approach and therefore deliberate. On the other hand, others argue that strategy evolves incrementally over time, which is termed an emergent strategy. In practice, many people agree that there is no strict way in which strategy is developed, and instead both ways, deliberate and emergent, lead to development of an organisation. So in terms of intended strategies, these strategies arise as a result of careful deliberation of top management. So it's also sometimes known as rational and analytic views of strategic development. But emergent strategies, on the other hand, describe strategies that do not develop as part of a plan formulated by the management, but rather emerge in the organisation as a whole in the course of the operation over time. But it will always start with this intended strategy, you know, the vision, the leadership command, and any externally imposed strategies and planning. But then emergent strategy development is more logical and looking at how you can allocate resources or deal with cultural or political things. And all of these result in changes and challenges in the implementation, intended and realised strategy, and uncertain and complex conditions. So the strategic planning cycle starts with firstly validating the organisational context, which is a planning stage of that strategy. Then you conduct your SWOT analysis and establish your goals and targets, which are your strategic intents. Define the actionable strategies, allocate your resources, execute the strategy, but then also manage, monitor progress and measure and report on that as well. Down on the bottom, you can actually see a sort of visualization of what happens with your intended strategy. So as the arrow's going down, you'll see that one coming back on itself. Occasionally you get some non-realized strategies that you intended because these emergent strategies are coming from a different direction. I mean, some of it's going to be deliberate, some of it's going to be emergent, but then your realized strategy is a combination of things that you intended and things that you didn't. Now, strategic development processes can be described as logical incrementalism, incrementalism, which is a philosophy where strategies are created through a series of small decisions and then reviewed periodically. So these develop as a result of like changes in the environment and generalized views on strategy, a bit of experimentation and coordinated emergent strategies. But in terms of sort of managing those strategies, it's important that you can know the difference between the intended and emergent strategies and know that these two strategies can take place at the same time and understand how managers can manage these strategies. Now, different organizations operate in different environments. They differ in terms of how complex or dynamic they are, in size, formality, mission, or structure. And as a result, they require each means of strategic development and different methods. So the key environmental conditions and considerations within strategic development are these simple static conditions, the dynamic ones, and complex conditions. So the simple static conditions are environments that are really simple to understand, like they're not typical, not typically subject to any change or going through any sort of disruptive changes. So they're really stable, really easy, really predictable. Your dynamic conditions are those that are changing. So there's a little bit of a degree of uncertainty, and businesses are looking constantly to the future. So customers and markets will be examined to help predict the future changes, and managers may be able to apply structured ways and sense of their sort of scenario planning by, I don't know, promoting organizational learning, so they continually review their skills, and sudden changes in the environment, whether it's political, economic, social, whatever, all of those things are going to cause a level of uncertainty in that environment. And the one on the right-hand side, the complex business environment or the complex conditions, is one which is quite difficult to comprehend or explain, because you've got technical knowledge of industries operating in the environment being really, really complex, or the organisations themselves being complex, like having multiple business units. So these environments are usually fairly dynamic, but in those conditions, clearly top managers need to be able to involve one another in the planning. And this is because specialists lower in the scalar chain understand the business environment and what the customer wants more than what the top managers do. Now, looking at the relationship between strategy and corporate business, I mean, it depends on the stage the business is at. If the organisation structure is going to change, it could be when a business is new or it has a really simple structure. And then depending on the environment a company operates in terms of its rate of growth, it can form even more complex structures like matrix structures. But we're going to look at these different types of structures and how they essentially align with your strategy and goals. So the simple structure, the top one, is where we don't really rely on any formal division of labour. So mostly solo proprietorships with one person performing multiple roles, or one person with just a handful of direct reports. Now, the simple structure arises for a need by an organisation to implement that with relatively few tasks, and it's probably because the organisation isn't large. The second one underneath is the functional structure. This is arranged into different departments that handle specific activities like HR, marketing, procurement, customer services. So this becomes useful when your company is growing, and the driver for the functional structure is to leverage specialist skills and knowledge of each function and avoid any duplication. Moving on to the multi-divisional one, which is the top one. Multi-divisional is a structure that's based on geographical locations or products needed to arrive at specialist divisional activities. So they're created and supplied with the organisation's support functions. So essentially each part is able to operate independently from other parts of the organisation. So you've expanded beyond the capabilities of a functional structure and you continue to grow to the next level. And that's typically because you've adopted a multi-divisional structure. And since the growth is due to implementation of strategy, it means that the strategy cannot be supported any longer through the functional aspects only. At the bottom, you have the matrix structure. This allows for an organisation to group its staff or employees based on products and functions. And product team members will have more than one reporting line. So you've obviously got your line manager and then your project manager that you report into. So with every implementation of strategy, the complexities of an organisation could be that you might need to increase efficiency and reduce cost. So large and complex organisations do suit themselves to a matrix structure. It allows the organisation to group its staff and employees both to projects and functions, bringing people together to work on a particular project. So you're controlled by the projects they're involved with, but you will also have a supervisor, a line manager. And the last one is the transnational strategy or the transnational matrix structure. Now, this type of structure is adopted by international businesses. It's multidimensional to ensure that each systematic is directional between each business unit, geographical area, and its functions. So each one's got its own region, and then it's got its functions underneath it. So you're kind of building up a mixture of the functional strategy and the multi-divisional strategy and putting them together. So this is an organizational strategy that shifts to global markets. So you operate both inside and outside of your home country. Now, the different forms of structure will not be arrived at loosely. They will be chosen to facilitate the activities that an organisation is following to an agreed strategy. So you do need to make sure that your strategy is an indispensable tool, because it's going to help you to be proactive rather than reactive in shaping your own future. But in every organisation, the supply chain is important because it's responsible for moving the raw materials from its suppliers to its products, and then it's shipping it to its customers. Now, the responsibilities of a supply chain structure is to increase the efficiency to an organisation, reduce the cost involved in the management of its supply chain, and manage vendors and suppliers at the end of each of the chain. Now, workers in organisations meet these responsibilities through proper implementation of effective quality control, internal procedures, and things that audit the supply chain. And to be effective in supply chain structure, you need to be incorporating both horizontal and vertical differentiation, which helps a firm sell products with different purposes to different customers. Now, in terms of the way the organisation organises its supply chain, for most, there's a planning of effort across lots of different functions, and you've got marketing, sales, finance, all have their own segment when they're doing their planning, but this kind of specialisation often leads to conflicts because you've got different preferences and expectations. So to ensure you've got supply chain success, it's really important you pick the right model rather than one that's going to interfere with the supply chain. So there are three models that you can choose from: a centralised one, a decentralised, or a hybrid. And of companies with the best and most efficient organisational structure, they didn't arrive at it with their first attempt. They've continued to adapt and refine their structure, often as part of the process of adapting to new environments and improving your processes. So the centralised model, you can see that the head office or the buying, whatever, is central right in the middle of that cluster, and they reach their customers north, south, east, west, all from that central structure. So here, the head office is given the control for their purchasing decisions. So they get economies of scale, they can leverage their spending, standardise things, make technology decisions, outsourcing. It's quite common when you've got quite a large spending power, and spending is visible, and you can exploit those economies of scale. The decentralised model could be for a company that's got a little bit more geographically dispersed business units. So the head office will probably set the policies and procedures about what you do, but there'll be some autonomy given to the decentralised business units that are scattered around the country or around the world even. And then the hybrid model looks at adopting both a centralised and a decentralised structure. So there's a sort of matrix reporting line. Typically, decentralised buyers need to report back to the head office. So this model, strategic decisions are made at headquarters, but lower level decisions will be made in the decentralised units. Now, factors that lead to supply chain success, choosing your best strategy and the best supply chain organisational structure is one thing, but making sure it's a success is another. And companies that treat organisational structures as separate from supply chains make the grave mistake of ignoring the most essential components of success, that these structures must align with the organisation's objectives, and therefore the strategy, structure and supply chain management must all be considered together to ensure they align. So you've got your purchasing activities at the top, which look at your logistics, your procurement, your systems, and your sourcing strategies, the tools that you use in terms of total cost of ownership, risk analysis, cost breakdown, e-procurement, reverse auctions, the processes on the left from sort of defining needs, analysing markets, pre-qualifying suppliers, and then the strategy at the bottom, which is your strategy for your supply chain, and making sure that it always aligns with your company strategy, and then developing those action plans to make sure you've got that corporate fit, support the whole supply chain, and use the available expertise and skills you have. Now, lead buyers are individuals within an organisation who are responsible for coordinating buying activities and setting strategy and policy. Now, in modern markets, a single company is in a position to compete successfully on its own. So instead, companies form these structures with other companies to be part of a supply chain network. Now, you do need to manage unexpected supply chain disruptions. This could be as a result of complexities in the global supply chain configurations, or the firms that find themselves in vulnerable and adverse business environments and conditions. So you could face problems in the upstream of your supply chain, which is essentially the early stage of involving finding raw materials and extracting raw materials from the ground. So that's the kind of one end of the from the upstream, and then you've got the downstream side that's pushing things in the direction of your customer. And you can see from the diagram on the left-hand side that it ends up looking like a network, really, because the customer and consumer could go and buy from either of the retailers. Those distribution sites are supplying both the retailers, so are the manufacturers, and so are the suppliers. So there's a lot of crossover and consolidation that is needed in order to make sure that you get from one end of the chain to the other and still satisfy the customer. So the McKinsey 7S framework was developed to help organisations evaluate and improve their performance. McKinsey consultants argue that in looking at an organisation as a whole, 7 variables are important. Firstly, the strategy, those actions an organisation plans to respond to. That could be because of your external environment, customers, competitors. The structure, do you want to divide tasks and coordinations? Do you want to centralise it, decentralise it, have a functional matrix network? Look at the systems, processes, whether they're formal or informal, and define how things are done. The style, in terms of your senior managers, do they create it themselves for the organisation? The staff, how do you socialise with the managers and what the business is about, including their employees and their attributes? The skills or the characteristics of an organisation in terms of what it does, its dominating attributes and capabilities. And then you've got the shared values. There's a guiding belief of fundamental ideas around which an organisation is built. So as an organisational strategy deals with creating, implementing and evaluating decisions made by its executives, it does so to achieve both long and short-term objectives and goals. And one of the crucial elements of this comes with implementing strategy and its human resources factor. And this is because an organisation requires people to run. It cannot run on its own. The human resource is a company need to develop the steps that implements its strategy. So in relation to the supply chain, this means that human resources must be able to recruit people who are capable of efficiently running the procurement and supply chain functions. And the advent of e-procurement and development of online supply chains have really raised the profile of the procurement professional. So you can see, excuse me, on the left-hand side, the traditional view versus the strategic view. And traditionally, the activity has been around employees, which has been very transactional and reactive and slow to change, not interrelated with larger problems or issues, very short-term, bureaucratic, focused, and investing in products capabilities, finance, technology. So it's that's the kind of traditional view, but now moving towards a more strategic HRM, which is where you think about partnerships with both internal and external groups, which is more transformational and proactive and integrative, flexible, fast and systematic, and long-term as well as medium. The control tends to be more organic rather than this bureaucratic. So it's really flexible, does what it needs to succeed, very broad job design, and it invests in its people, its skills, its knowledge, and its availabilities. So on the right-hand side, what you're seeing here is the human resources activities. So I suppose strategic HR management is important to all organisations, regardless of its size, because it needs to align each HR function with its organisational strategy. It needs to help establish a relationship between the strategic management and the HR department. And it gives the human resources department the support it needs to change its image from an expense or cost centre to something that's a strategic business partner. So, sorry about that. So the strategic HR management activities would look at resource planning, recruitment and selection, training and development, as well as performance management, employee appraisals, and compensation and rewards management. And then managing information. So in terms of managing information, we need systems that are going to help us to collect and manage the information that we hold. And in a race to remain competitive and enhance skills and capabilities and survive in a changing business environment, businesses are always looking to improve their decision making, which relies on collecting data and analysing. So the collection and analysis of information is no longer done manually. Instead, systems are used to collect megabytes of data on a daily basis that are stored. If this data is then not turned into understandable information, it fails to serve the company appropriately. So this is why businesses now make use of their information technology, not just to collect these vast amounts of data, but also analyse the information produced by to help decision making. So you've got the sort of database which stores information, the management which is acting upon the information that's gathered, and what information is being collected. So for a company to reap the benefits of its management information system, the system must provide reliable, timely, and useful information. In the procurement domain, businesses adopt procurement management systems to streamline and automate the source to settle process while controlling costs by directing purchases to their approved suppliers. Now, clearly there's a massive role with technology. You know, when you're implementing any strategy, technology is going to be helpful to enable your procurement and supply employees in a firm to carry out their everyday duties. So, you know, here is lots of different types of, you know, bits and pieces that we use in regards to technology, but it's about sort of e-sourcing, procurement, purchasing, auctions, tenders, invoicing, all of this being done using technology, including its purchase cards, its purchase systems, marketplaces, which have lots of suppliers sitting behind it like Amazon, contract registers, holding details in a supplier database, building up business intelligence, ERP and MRP, which is enterprise resource planning and manufacturer resource planning and inventory. EPOS is electronic point of sale using barcodes or radio frequency ID, nanotechnology, intranets and extranets. So there's so much that we can benefit from in procurement using technology, such as reducing the time and effort, improving processes, efficiency, collaboration. Acquisition is made much easier, time flow, workflow management, and a reduction in cost in the communication. And then the financial aspects of value creation is the kind of managing finance umbrella. You know, all organisations, whether in whatever private, public or third sector, it doesn't really matter. They all need to be transparent. But there are differences between private and public and third sectors. I mean, public and third operate in the context of a sort of not-for-profit, meaning value is much, much more beyond price. They're looking for things like social value. And although there is an increasing emphasis on private sector organisations adding value to improve their brand and reputation, the main aim of a private sector organisation, of course, is to make a profit and get a return for their shareholders. So financial management is the planning, directing and controlling of your financial activities, which make 3 decisions around capital structure, investments, budgets and dividends. So the functions of financial management would be assessing how much funds are needed to invest in daily operations. So estimate how much you need to run. And it's important to determine the amount of money needed for a given project to be implemented in the future. And so once your forecasting is done, the organisation will now know the investment it needs to have in terms of its fixed assets and working capital. So the fixed assets are the tangible property that's owned by the company that it uses in its operations to generate income. These assets or equipment are not expected to be converted into cash in the next 12 months. Working capital is the capital of the business that's used in the day-to-day trading. So it's calculated by the current assets minus the current liabilities. So your current assets are the cash and other assets that's owned by the company, which can be converted into cash. But the liabilities is the money you owe other people. So assets is what you own, liabilities is what you owe. So your loans, credits, and anything that's repayable in the next 12 months. So an organisation can choose between 2 funding strategies. You've got debt funding and equity funding. Debt funding is the simplest way to finance a funding strategy. To get debt finance is simply taking out a loan. The lender can be a single lender or a group of lenders. But in a group, each lender lends a portion of the loan. So this could be syndicate debt finance. Now, debt funding has benefits because the lender is not entitled to equity, but they're entitled to equity, but they cannot claim part of the business. They're only entitled to the loan and the interest. They can deduct the interest from the tax returns, lowering the actual loan costs. And it's quite easy to fund it in this way. But the downside is it does require repayment. It's fixed costs that you need in order to break even. And sometimes the interest costs can be high. So the alternative is to go equity funding, where you use equity to fund your strategy. So you raise money by issuing shares on the stock market for a publicly traded company like a PLC. If you're a privately traded company, it can offer more shares to existing shareholders or get funding from outside partners like venture capitalists or wealthy individuals. So these types of funding do not require repayment. There's no interest. And you're free to pursue other funding strategies as well. No collateral is offered. But the downside is it decreases the owner's ownership in the business because the lender has a claim on the business. The investor is part of the company, so they'll expect a share of profits. They must comply with securities laws when they're registering their lenders. And you have to have meetings by shareholders to agree the equity funding before the funding can be sought. So that is the end of Learning Outcome 3. Hope you found that useful, and thank you for watching.